What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Silent Death. Part 1. First Signs. The sonar ping echoed through the U.S. Hawthorne's hull like a digital heartbeat, each pulse sending ripples of anxiety through Lieutenant Sarah Chen's chest. 6 hours had passed since they'd lost contact with command, and the silence from above was deafening. Their nuclear submarine, normally a bastion of military precision, had descended into an atmosphere thick with unease. "Contact bearing 045, sonar operator Jenkins called out, his voice tight. "Sounds like a Type XO95, Chinese hunter-killer sub, sir." Captain Reynolds, a 20-year veteran with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, leaned over the sonar station. "Distance?" "Approximately 15,000 yards and closing, sir." Chen watched as Reynolds' jaw tightened. They were already running silent, hiding from 3 other hostile submarines in their sector. World War III had erupted 2 weeks ago, and the South China Sea had become a graveyard for the unwary. But the enemy's submarines weren't what worried Chen most. It was the quarantine order they'd received just before communications went dark. 3 crew members were in isolation in the medical bay, suffering from what Doc Martinez had described as some kind of fever. The symptoms didn't match any known pathogen. Extreme aggression, an insatiable hunger, and most disturbing of all, an apparent immunity to sedatives. "Lieutenant Chen," Reynolds' voice cut through her thoughts. "Get down to medical. Martinez requested you 10 minutes ago." Chen's stomach churned. As the submarine's executive officer and second in command, she knew that requested meant ordered. The walk to medical had never felt longer, each step through the narrow corridors echoing off steel walls that suddenly felt more like a cage than protection. The first sign something was wrong was the silence. Medical should have had the low hum of monitoring equipment, the murmur of voices. Instead, there was nothing. "Doc?" Chen called out, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. No response. The automatic door to medical slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing darkness inside. The emergency lights cast everything in a bloody red glow. Papers were scattered across the floor, and one of the examination tables was overturned. "Martinez?" Chen drew her weapon, clicking on the attached flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating splashes of something dark on the walls. Blood. A wet, guttural sound came from behind a storage cabinet. Chen swung her light toward it, and her blood ran cold. Doc Martinez was there, but he wasn't alone. He was hunched over Petty Officer Santos, one of the quarantined crew members. Martinez's medical whites were soaked crimson, and his movements were jerky, inhuman. As her light hit him, he turned. His face was no longer human. His eyes were milky white, unseeing, and his mouth was full of Santos's throat. Chen's training kicked in before her horror could paralyze her. She keyed her comm unit. "Captain, we have a situation in medical. Martinez and Santos are..." The words caught in her throat as Martinez began to rise, movements puppet-like. Behind him, Santos's body twitched, then started to move as well. A distant explosion rocked the submarine, sending Chen stumbling against the doorframe. The Chinese sub must have found them. "All hands! Battle stations!" Reynolds' voice boomed through the ship's comm system. "Incoming torpedo! Emergency dive!" Chen slammed her hand on the medical bay's emergency lockdown button as Martinez lunged for her. The reinforced door slid shut with a decisive thunk, sealing the horror inside. But as she turned to run back to the control room, a horrible realization hit her. There had been 3 crew members in quarantine. Where was the third? The submarine pitched violently to port, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, Chen heard screaming. Part 2. Depth of Terror. Chen sprinted through the corridor, her boots clanging against the metal deck plates. The screaming had come from the direction of the mess hall. Another violent lurch sent her shoulders slamming into a bulkhead as the Hawthorne continued its emergency dive. "XO to bridge," she barked into her comm. Captain, we have a biological contamination event. Martinez and Santos are infected. Highly aggressive. Third quarantine patient unaccounted for. Understanding timing, Reynolds replied, his voice tight with tension. We've got bigger problems. 2 more enemy contacts just appeared on sonar. They're boxing us in. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound that made Chen's skin crawl. A wet, ripping noise followed by inhuman growling. She reached the mess hall entrance and found Petty Officer Garcia pressed against the wall, trembling, his white cook's uniform splattered with red. XO, he whispered, eyes wide with terror. It's Specialist Wong. The one from quarantine. She just tore out Rodriguez's throat. With her teeth. Inside the mess hall, tables were overturned. Rodriguez's body lay sprawled across the serving counter, blood pooling beneath him. Wong was nowhere to be seen. Get to the armory, Chen ordered Garcia. Now, alert Master Chief Pierce. We need weapons and riot gear. She keyed her comm again. All hands, this is the XO. We have a hostile biological threat aboard. Any crew displaying extreme aggression or bite wounds should be considered dangerous. Do not attempt to subdue. Repeat, do not attempt to subdue. The submarine shuddered as a distant explosion sent a pressure wave through the hull. Warning klaxons began to blare. Torpedo impact, aft section, someone shouted over the general comm. Hull breach in compartment 7. Emergency seal initiated. DCT to bridge, came the damage control team's report. Breach contained, but we've lost access to the engine room. Chief Wallace and his team were trapped inside when the emergency doors dropped. Chen felt her blood run cold. Wallace's team had been doing maintenance near where Wong was last seen heading. If she'd reached them before the torpedo hit. Bridge, this is the XO. We need to send someone to check on Wallace's team. They may be compromised. Negative, Reynolds responded. We've got 4 enemy subs coordinating an attack pattern. I need you in CIC now. We're running out of room to maneuver. A horrible screeching sound echoed through the corridor. The distinctive noise of someone trying to claw their way through a metal door. It was coming from the sealed engine room. Sir, Chen said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I don't think Wallace's team is going to make it. The screeching grew louder, joined by more voices. Then, through the thick metal door, came a sound that shouldn't have been possible at their depth. Laughter. High, inhuman, hungry laughter. Multiple torpedo launches detected. Jenkins' panicked voice cut through the comm. Chinese and Russian signatures. They're firing everything they've got. Chen checked her sidearms magazine and started running towards CIC. They were trapped between the enemy above and the horror below, with nowhere left to hide. The Hawthorne's nuclear reactor hummed behind the sealed door, providing power to a crew that was rapidly running out of options, and in the darkness of the engine room, something continued to laugh. Part 3. Pressure Point. The Combat Information Center was a symphony of chaos when Chen arrived. Red emergency lights pulsed in rhythm with the warning klaxons as crew members called out torpedo positions and evasion coordinates. Captain Reynolds stood at the tactical display, his face illuminated by the blue glow of incoming threat markers. 6 torps tracking, sir, Jenkins reported. 2 Russian, 4 Chinese. Impact in 40 seconds. Launch countermeasures, Reynolds ordered. Helm, take us deeper. We need to get under their attack pattern. Chen took her station beside the captain. Sir, we need to talk about our internal situation. Already briefed by Master Chief Pierce, Reynolds replied, eyes locked on the tactical display. We've got teams setting up defensive positions on all decks. How many infected? Confirmed? 4. Martinez, Santos, Wong, and now potentially Wallace's entire engineering team. But sir, there's something else. They're changing. A violent explosion rocked the submarine. One of the torpedoes had detonated close enough to shake the hull. 5 remaining, Jenkins called out. But we've got a problem. Sonar is picking up weird noises from the engine room. Like metal being torn apart. Reynolds and Chen shared a look. They both knew the engine room's walls were 3 inches of reinforced steel. Sir, Chen said quietly, Whatever this infection is, it's making them stronger. And they're coordinating. That's not normal zombie behavior. Lieutenant, Reynolds replied with a grim smile. There's no such thing as normal zombie behavior. But point taken. Options? Another torpedo detonated. Closer this time. The lights flickered. 2 possibilities, Chen said, steadying herself against her console. We surface, try to contact command, maybe get assistance. And paint a big target on our backs for our friends up there? Next option. We head for the Mariana Trench. Take us deep enough that the pressure... The ship's internal comm system crackled to life with Master Chief Pierce's voice. CIC, we've got a breach. They've broken through the engine room door. Multiple hostiles. Jesus Christ, they're fast. Fall back to... His transmission cut off in a burst of gunfire and screaming. 3 torpedoes remaining, Jenkins shouted. Impact in 20 seconds. Reynolds grabbed the ship-wide comm. All hands. This is the captain. Engine room breach confirmed. All personnel withdraw to upper decks. Weapons free on infected targets. I repeat, weapons free. The tactical display showed the enemy submarines adjusting their positions, trying to anticipate the Hawthorne's next move. They were being herded into a kill zone. Sir, Chen said, drawing her sidearm as distant gunfire echoed through the ship. About my second option. The Mariana Trench. Reynolds nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The pressure at that depth would crush anything trying to breach the hull, including us, if we go too deep. Another explosion rattled the ship. Warning lights flashed as systems began to redline. 2 torpedoes incoming, Jenkins' voice cracked. And sir, the noise from below. It's getting closer. Reynolds straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. How long to reach crush depth, Lieutenant? 30 minutes, if we redline the backup engines, assuming we can evade long enough. The captain's response was cut off by a blood-curdling shriek from somewhere below them. It was followed by another, then another. A chorus of inhuman voices that seemed to vibrate through the hull itself. Contact! A Marine guard at the CIC entrance shouted, raising his rifle. Multiple contacts approaching through the lower corridor. They're crawling on the ceiling. Reynolds keyed the helm controls. Plot a course for the Mariana Trench. Maximum speed. He turned to Chen, his expression grim. Lieutenant, I hope you're right about the pressure killing them. Because if you're wrong... The first infected crew member appeared in the doorway, moving with impossible speed. Its uniform was shredded, flesh pale and twisted. But its eyes were no longer unseeing. They were filled with terrible intelligence. And it was smiling. Part 4. Descent. The Marine Guard's rifle chattered, the sound deafening in the confined space of CIC. The first infected crew member, what used to be Chief Wallace, jerked as rounds impacted but didn't fall. Behind it, more shapes scrambled through the doorway, moving with that same terrible speed. Helm, emergency dive, Reynolds ordered. Jenkins, status on those torpedoes. Impact in 10 seconds. They're still tracking. Chen aimed her sidearm at Wallace's head, but the creature moved with preternatural awareness, dodging as she fired. Its muscles had transformed, bulging and twisted beneath gray skin. Most horrifying was its face, still recognizable as Wallace, but now wearing an expression of calculated malice. They're learning, Chen shouted over the gunfire. Headshots aren't working anymore. The submarine pitched forward as it began its desperate dive toward the trench. The sudden angle sent one of the infected sprawling, but the others adapted instantly, their limbs contorting to maintain balance. Wallace's mouth opened in that terrible smile again, revealing rows of sharpened teeth. 5,000 meters, the helm officer called out. Hull pressure increasing. 2 massive explosions rocked the ship in quick succession. The lights went out completely for 3 seconds before the backups kicked in. Last torpedo incoming, Jenkins screamed. 5 seconds. Brace for impact, Reynolds ordered. Chen grabbed a console as Wallace lunged forward, crossing the distance faster than seemed possible. But the timing was off. The torpedo detonation sent a massive shockwave through the hull, and the infected leader slammed into a navigation station instead of reaching her. "Direct hit!" someone shouted. "Hull breach in the forward torpedo room!" "Seal it off," Reynolds commanded. "All compartments emergency lockdown. Continue descent." The remaining infected had spread out around CIC's periphery, moving with disturbing coordination. They weren't attacking randomly anymore. They were cutting off escape routes, herding the crew into the center of the room. 7,000 meters, the helm reported. "Sir, the Chinese subs are falling behind. They can't follow us this deep." A horrible screech of metal drew everyone's attention to the ceiling. An access panel was being pried open from above. They were coming in through the maintenance tubes. 9,000 meters! The hull groaned ominously as the pressure outside continued to build. Warning indicators flashed across every console. They were approaching their theoretical maximum depth. Wallace's twisted form straightened, and to everyone's horror, it spoke. The voice was wrong, like multiple voices layered together. "You think the pressure will stop us? We're evolving, adapting. Every system in this ship will be ours. 10,000 meters. Sir, hull integrity is critical." Chen saw Reynolds' hand move to the emergency ballast release. If he blew the tanks now, they'd drop like a stone. "Lieutenant," the captain said quietly, "I need options. We're out of time." A section of ceiling gave way with a thunderous crash as more infected dropped into CIC. These ones were even more transformed. Their bodies had begun to merge with pieces of the ship itself, metal fused with flesh in horrific combinations. Chen's mind raced. The pressure wasn't killing them fast enough. They were adapting to it, somehow using the ship's own structure to reinforce themselves. Unless... "The reactor," she said suddenly. "Captain, we need to overload the reactor." Reynolds' eyes widened. "The radiation. They're binding themselves to the ship's systems. If we flood everything with enough radiation..." Wallace's laugh cut her off. More of those layered voices had joined it now, speaking in unison. "Your bodies will join with ours. Your knowledge will be absorbed. We will rise from the depths as something new. Something perfect. 11,000 meters. Hull breach imminent." Chen met Reynolds' eyes. "Your order, sir?" The captain looked at the tactical display one last time. The enemy's subs were dots far above them now. Then he looked at what remained of his crew, surrounded by the horror his ship had become. "Do it," he said. The infected surged forward as one, but Chen was already moving. She had to reach the reactor controls before they reached her. The fate of more than just their crew hung in the balance now. They had created something down here in the dark, in the crushing depths of the ocean, something that could not be allowed to reach the surface. The hull screamed as they passed 12,000 meters, and the real descent began. Part 5. Final Depth. The corridor to the reactor control room had become a nightmare of twisted metal and flesh. Emergency lights strobed through clouds of steam from ruptured pipes, illuminating walls that pulsed with organic growth. The infected had spread through the ship's systems like a cancer, melding with its infrastructure. Chen ran, Reynolds and 3 surviving Marines close behind. The ship groaned around them as they passed 13,000 meters, the hull protesting against pressures it was never designed to withstand. "They're in the overhead," one Marine shouted, firing upward as shadows moved through the pipes above. Return fire came in the form of crystallized fragments of metal, launched from what used to be human arms, but had transformed into organic railguns. 14,000 meters, Jenkins' voice crackled through their comms. "Chinese subs have reversed course, but I'm picking up something else. Something big, coming up from the trench." Chen's lungs burned as they reached the reactor control room. The door was sealed, its surface crawling with biomechanical growth. What looked like circuit boards had been woven into pulsing tissue, creating new and impossible patterns. "Set the charges," Reynolds ordered, and the Marines began planting their remaining explosives around the door frame. They had one shot at this. The biomass in the walls around them began to pulse faster, and that multi-layered voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "Your technology, your biology, your mitashes, all will be perfected. We are the next step." "Clear!" a Marine shouted. Chen slammed the detonator. The explosion ripped through the reinforced door, but instead of flying inward, It seemed to be absorbed into the organic matter. Then, horrifically, the door began to reconstitute itself. "Again!" Chen shouted, reaching for her last thermite grenade. "Everything we've got!" They threw their remaining explosives as one. The combined detonation sent a shockwave through the corridor that knocked them all back. When the smoke cleared, there was a hole, but it was closing fast. "Go!" Reynolds ordered. "Lieutenant, get in there! We'll hold them here!" Chen didn't hesitate. She dove through the shrinking opening, feeling the mutated metal scrape against her suit as it tried to seal itself. Inside, the reactor control room had become something out of a biological nightmare. The control panels had been consumed by the same growing mass, but the emergency reactor controls, designed to withstand nuclear war, still gleamed defiantly. 15,000 meters. Jenkins's voice was barely audible through the static. "Hull breaches on multiple decks. And sir, the thing in the trench, it's massive!" Outside the control room, gunfire erupted. Chen could hear Reynolds shouting orders as she ran to the control panel. The ship's reactor safety systems had been designed to prevent meltdown at all costs. She'd have to override them manually. A tendril of biomass whipped around her ankle. She hit the floor hard, her tablet skidding away. Looking back, she saw Wallace, or what was left of him, flowing through the hole in the door like liquid metal. "Your resistance is magnificent," the voices said through him. "It will make us stronger when we absorb you." Chen drew her knife and hacked at the tendril, but the blade simply sank into the mass. It began pulling her back, more tendrils emerging from the walls. 16,000 meters! Jenkins screamed through the comm. "Something's happening to the trench creature. It's changing course. Coming right for us." The biomass was up to Chen's waist now, trying to merge with her suit. She could feel it probing, seeking entry points. Wallace's form loomed over her, his body now a horrific amalgamation of human, machine, and something else entirely. With her free hand, Chen reached for the reactor controls. Her fingers found the emergency override panel. "Even if you trigger it," Wallace's voices said, "we'll adapt, absorb the radiation, become stronger." Chen smiled through gritted teeth. "That's what I'm counting on." She slammed her hand down on the panel, entering the final code. But instead of initiating a meltdown, she triggered an emergency scram, an immediate shutdown of all reactor systems. The ship went dark. Without power, the pressure at 16,000 meters did what radiation couldn't. The hull began to implode, compartment by compartment. The biomass screamed, not in pain, but in triumph, thinking it would adapt to this too. Then Chen pulled out her tablet, showing Wallace the sonar reading she'd been monitoring. The massive shape rising from the trench wasn't coming to help the infected. It was hunting them. The ancient creature from the depths, drawn to the disturbance in its territory, slammed into the Hawthorne's hull. 16,000 meters of pressure rushed in all at once. The biomass tried to adapt, tried to merge with the creature's DNA. But the Leviathan's evolutionary perfection, honed over millions of years in the crushing depths, rejected the infection instantly. Chen felt Reynolds grab her arm, pulling her back through the hole in the door. Emergency oxygen systems engaged as the hull finally gave way. The last thing she saw was Wallace's form being torn apart, the biomass dissolving under the impossible pressure as the ancient guardian of the depths claimed its prey. The emergency pods, designed to withstand even these pressures for short periods, shot toward the surface. Inside one, Chen and Reynolds watched their depth gauge slowly tick upward. The infected were gone, destroyed by the very evolution they had tried to perfect. "Jenkins," Reynolds called over the emergency comm. "Status of the enemy subs?" "Gone, sir," came the weak reply from another pod. They saw something on their sonar. Something big. They're running silent back to their bases." Chen leaned back, exhausted. They had lost the Hawthorne, but they had prevented something far worse. In the deepest part of the ocean, they had found that some depths were never meant to be breached, and some adaptations came at too high a price. As their pods rose toward the surface, toward a world still at war but safe from what they had contained in the depths, Chen thought she felt, just for a moment, a deep subsonic rumble. a sound of ancient power returning to its slumber, guardian of a darkness that would remain undisturbed, until the next time humanity ventured too deep. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that story as much as I did. Come back next time for some more scary stories. And as always, remember to face your fears.